was the longest count. Good morning to you wherever you are, because it is for June 13th of 2024. My name is Bernie Burns. Sitting right over there. Do not call it a comeback. It's Ashley Burns. Hi, Ash.
I've been here the whole time.
Oh my God, did I miss you?
I missed you as well. I'm glad that you're home.
I missed you one moment in particular.
Go ahead.
Which sounds gross, but it's not. I missed you when I almost died on the plane.
What?
I had the worst turbulence of my life going out to Austin. And I didn't mention it with all my guests, not even Gavin, who I love to talk about travel stuff with. I had literally the worst turbulence of my entire life, and I think we manifested it by talking about
Right, we
turbulence.
had just talked about the deadly turbulence the other week.
I can't put I won't put a lot of I won't put any video up of it, but we were flying from, it was such a last minute thing, I ended up booking myself through O'Hare in Chicago.
That's a
I
mistake.
Never ever do. But I did break my streak, my lifetime streak of being delayed every time I go through Chicago. So this time I got out.
You had it on time.
I got out on time.
That's impressive.
But we hit something. It was like one just big, massive jolt of turbulence, and it was so bad that all the drinks that people had out hit the ceiling.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it wasn't like, it wasn't like, some of the things you've been reading about online. I'm sure people have been through worse turbulence before, but yeah. So then it was like Coke or whatever on the ceiling and
Like
dripping on me
Oh.
for the rest of the time. And it was just crazy. Everybody like screamed on the plane. I should have warned someone before, we said this, but if you're traveling today, don't listen to the podcast. Too late.
That part.
But yeah, so then the flight attendants went from, I saw one, I pointed to the Coke that was the Coke cloud that was over my head raining Coke on me. And she goes, "Oh, thank you." And then she was kind of laughing, because it was nervous laughter. But then they immediately went into first aid mode. Like they were going passenger by passenger asking, does anyone need help? Does anyone need first aid?
Wow.
But I don't think anyone did. I think everyone was okay. But it was, if I wasn't wearing my seatbelt, I would have been maybe not on the ceiling, but I would have been out of my seat and in the aisle for sure, probably.
You would have been with the rest of the soda.
Yeah, probably. It was crazy. And I don't think anyone got hit by any of the glasses or anything like that. So, but it was wild.
Maybe if we're lucky, everyone listened to the episode where we said, "Hey, wear your seatbelts on the plane."
Maybe. I certainly did. And you never know when it's going to happen or where it's going to hit. But I'm glad to be back, Ashley. I am glad to look at your gorgeous face after a week of looking at all these strangers on your mic.
Absolute
instead.
strangers. Yeah, and so much has happened while you were gone.
There was so much current events that I know you wanted to talk about in particular. Some video game stuff too.
Yeah, so it's been a big week for video games. Normally, this would be the time that E3 is happening, RIP. So a lot of the game companies are sort of keeping the spirit alive in their own way, which is they're all doing their own showcases, which is really, if you think about it, the reason we don't have an E3 anymore. So there was the Summer Games Fest, which is Jeff Keighley's thing, which is kind of a third party.
Can I ask you how do you feel about this as a video game consumer, as a video game enthusiast? E3 was like an anchor around all these devs' necks. We were told they had to make these things for E3 when really they were supposed to be heading for the holiday season. Traditionally, they had to stop and make these demos for E3. We all stopped going to E3, got rid of E3, and the devs still keep doing stuff at the same time. It's like we set you free.
Yes and no. I mean, I have a different perspective on E3 than a lot of people because almost my entire adult life, I did not attend E3 as a consumer. I attended it as an industry professional.
You did, or a fake industry professional when you first went.
Yeah, exactly. I faked it till I made it. And so a lot of it was, work related. But it was a nice time for me, not just because there was something about the energy of sort of everyone coming together for this one time to show off all their stuff. But it was also for me like a industry family reunion, once a year.
Yeah.
And that was a nice element to it. But as far as the games go, yes, we were always told the developers had to sort of stop and make E3 specific builds of the games, which then, took away from their mainline development timeline, all of that sort of stuff. And they were happy to not necessarily have to do that anymore.
I feel like we're like the ecologists who like rescued some kind of animal. You take it out to the wilderness in a cage, you open the door and you go, "You're free." And it goes out and goes, "I like that cage." Super cozy. Just goes right back. It's such a disappointment. We set them free, and here they are going back doing it on their own.
I do feel like it's different now, though. So we've had so Sony did their, I think it's called State of Play. So they did their showcase. It was like honestly not a lot to write home about. Summer Games Fest. Yes, you may.
I have a question.
Yes.
Before
You
we
with
go,
your hand up over there.
Before we go all in on the Summer Games Fest stuff, because I know you're going to have a lot of information to dump, and not everyone's into video games. Can we talk about something current events that's related to, it's like a lead into this?
Okay, go ahead.
So yesterday it was announced that Sony, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, they purchased Austin-based, Austin-founded, Austin original Alamo Drafthouse Cinemas.
Right. So which for those unfamiliar is a chain of theaters that sort of I would say it popularized the idea of being able to order food and have it brought to you while you watch the movie in the theater. There are now quite a few theaters that do that, but that's the first one that I ever heard of that did it. That's the first time I ever experienced it. And they also had a weird, interesting, almost like cinephile underground culture, if that makes sense.
Oh, man,
like
they did so much cool stuff.
They did a lot of events. They did all this crazy stuff. Like they were like, we fucking love movies, guys. We're the movie guys. And that was really the vibe for the Alamo Drafthouse. And it's now been purchased by Sony, which is wild to me. I know that Alamo Drafthouse has been having some troubles recently. In fact, they closed down, they had to close down all of the theaters in Dallas or something like that. But
that was one of their franchisees.
Okay.
So they went through a process where, they were started essentially in one room. Did you ever go to the original Alamo on Colorado?
yes, I did.
It was upstairs. It was like over a club, and it was just
tiny.
one. It was one theater,
Yeah.
and it was Tim and Carrie League, and they started. The first time I met them, they were tearing tickets out in front, and this is in the mid-late 90s. And yeah, they just expanded from there. There's a very long story with investment and the Alamo Drafthouse Cinemas, and they've been involved with private equity in the most recent history, and it's been tumultuous, and it's been a weird time. We've talked about it a lot with Furiosa. It's been a really tough time for theaters, not just for the recent events, but also COVID was like, it almost took theaters away entirely. I can't imagine what it was like to survive, that whole thing. So now they've sold outright to Sony, it looks like. This is all coming from an article that I read by our old friend, Mr. Richard Whitaker of the Austin Chronicle. I think is the article that's going everywhere that everyone is quoting when they talk about it. So now they're purchased outright. And I think the thing I find funny about it is that now among all the different things that Sony does, there's a lot of talk, of course, about vertical integration between Sony, Columbia, and having a theater now. But of all the things they own now, Sony also really kind of interestingly owns a restaurant chain of all things.
Yeah. I guess when you think of, it is kind of like it's like a themed restaurant chain, isn't it? It's like
a
you're
themed
gonna go,
restaurant. Yeah.
You're gonna order from the menu, and which movie are you seeing with your meal today?
It's funny you say, like, I do think of Alamo as having popularized this or kind of created this genre, but dinner theater was a thing. Like dinner, I've always heard about it, like dinner theater. And from the Wikipedia entry article on it, dinner theater is a form of entertainment that combines a restaurant meal with a staged musical or play. So this was something that they had for live theater. They would have where they would serve you a meal and then you'd watch a play.
Right. I mean, I think of that as a little bit different though, because in that you're like sitting around a table and it's not exactly dark and you're, maybe having a little bit of chit chat with the people around you, right? For dinner theater.
I've never been to a dinner theater thing.
I feel like dinner theater specifically, that calls to me interactive.
Yeah.
Like, coming down like into the audience and like, audience participation. So thank God Alamo didn't have that part.
And that's been around for centuries. I think the only thing keeping that alive is medieval times.
I love medieval times.
Have you done that?
Yeah.
I've never done
It's
that.
fantastic. And they give you, like, when you go to it, they give you like a night to cheer for, like, this is your night. And so you get really into it. And you're like, yeah, you got him. Like, for example.
None of that shit, by the way, exists in the UK. No Ren fairs, no medieval times, none of that.
They do, actually. I'm starting to find on Instagram some, like, small things. But they're not at scale. They're not nearly at the scale of, like, the Texas Renaissance Festival or anything like that.
Wes Ellis recently did some, a photographer friend of ours and former colleague, recently did some promotional photography for the Ren Fair docuseries, which is out right now. We got to watch that. I haven't seen that yet.
We do. It's on the list.
That's about the Texas Ren Fair specifically, right?
Is it?
Which is the OG.
It's a fantastic Renaissance festival. It's interesting in that it's one of the few, I feel like, I mean, I don't know, I guess a lot of other ones, but it's like a permanent town that's set up. And they just move into it for 3 months a year. But it's like there's like buildings and things that exist. When I was like young and would go to them, they would, they'd be like, we set up a tent here.
It's
and
like
it was
camp, yeah.
Yeah, whereas this is like a little town. And it was so cool. I love it. They're so much fun. But yeah, we should watch that film. We are getting away from Alamo Drafthouse talk, though.
And leading back into Sony. Don't worry, we're looping back around. We always got this, babe.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So what I saw about this whole thing with Sony buying Alamo Drafthouse is that until 2020, this would have been illegal. Bernie, what's the implication?
For 71 years, there was something called, it was an antitrust agreement called the Paramount Decree. So back when the studios were so massive and so controlling and the major form of media that was out there, I guess it was this rule that was put in place saying they couldn't own the theaters as well. It's just typical like vertical integration. You can't control the whole chain. You know?
Is that maybe kind of like the way that cars don't have their own dealerships?
Yeah, like in Texas, it was illegal to buy a Tesla for a while. Like when I bought a Tesla, you had to buy it in California and pay for it before it arrived in Texas because the Automotive Dealer Association or something made it illegal for automotive manufacturers to sell directly to the customers. You know what I mean? I don't know if that was a government decree or if it's more like
I love it's like mandated middleman. Have fun, everybody.
How great. Yeah.
But Bernie, I think the most exciting thing, honestly, about Sony buying Alamo Drafthouse is everyone is going to get a chance to eat while they watch Madam Web.
Over and over and over again. Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff too that Alamo, even though it got to be this major thing that went all over the country, they were a little subversive and they would do cool, fun stuff. Sometimes they would get in trouble for it. But it was the kind of thing I don't think that Sony will continue, or maybe they'll be hands off. I don't know, but Sony does so much different stuff. They do consumer electronics products. They do televisions, they do the PlayStation, but then they do the video game development for the Sony as well, which I think is actually more of a modern day version of antitrust than movie studios. Like movie studios do we need the same antitrust protections that we had 71 years ago? Do we need those today? I would argue that no, I'm not really too worried about this.
I mean, I think that theaters are in an interesting place where I would argue that theaters are not the juggernaut that they once were. And they might need, they may not necessarily all be profit drivers. Like they are going to need backing to even stay alive at this point. Just the way that the box office is going these days, if you're not the new Bad Boys movie.
I mean, let's say this. Like, if you think about it, is a modern day cinema your PlayStation 5? That's where you're going to watch most of your movies. Like, how many people watch stuff on their PlayStation 5 versus the Alamo Drafthouse? Like, you talk about Madam Web. Did more people go see it at Alamo Drafthouse Cinemas specifically, or did more people watch it on their PlayStation 5? Which now there's, according to the stats I have, the PlayStation 5 as of February 2024, the PlayStation 5 has sold 54 million units worldwide, which is crazy into itself because the PlayStation 2 sold 158 million.
Man, the PlayStation 2 was a phenomenon, though.
PlayStation 4 was 117 and the PlayStation 3, 87 million. Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so that's yeah. I mean, I feel like the hardware market's changed a lot, but there's no arguing. The PlayStation 2 was like something else. Do you remember people would buy the PlayStation 2 specifically because it was a DVD player and they could watch movies on it then?
Or a Blu-ray player, which is another you need to talk about Sony and vertical integration all the time. Like Blu-ray was their format of high definition DVD, excuse me. I was going to make a HD DVD joke that we made for Red versus Blue. But like there was HD DVD and there was two formats for the high definition version of physical media. And Sony was Blu-ray and they put it on their Sony PlayStations and it won. Well, nobody's buying HD DVDs anymore. Those are long gone.
That's one of the reasons I feel like the PlayStation 2 did so well with DVD is they were, if I recall correctly, one of the first. They were the first console to be a DVD player as well.
Most people bought a PlayStation. I shouldn't say most people. A lot of people bought it just to be a Blu-ray player as well.
Yeah, like that was a perfectly normal reason to buy a PS2. And likewise, I feel like them putting it into, the putting Blu-ray into the PlayStation was a really big factor in that winning the format war between Blu-ray and HD DVD. It doesn't always work out for Sony. You know, I mean, they had, what was it? The PSP had it, those weird, like little spinny disc things in the case. Their proprietary stuff doesn't always work out, but when it does, it works really well.
And Sony has a history of not really capitalizing on vertical integration as well. In the late 90s, they had a memory stick, which is like a proprietary memory card. Back when there were like CF cards and then people were figuring out what was going to be next. So the memory stick could go in a lot of different devices, but really digital cameras was one. And they even had some Sony
like
TVs.
camcorders?
Yeah, like camcorders or, digital cameras at the time. Sony wants you like, oh shit, I got to buy this memory stick that doesn't go in anything else. And it didn't take off because SD cards took off. But I always say, if Sony had included the memory stick as the default memory card for the PlayStation 2, we would still be using memory sticks to this day. But they just didn't do it. It's one of those things where sometimes a company gets so big that the different departments become rivals of each other in the marketplace. And Sony wanted to sell, PlayStation wanted to sell you an 8 gig memory card instead of a 128 meg memory stick. They wanted to sell you the little proprietary Sony memory card for like $40 a pop, $30 a pop, because they could make more money per meg back then.
Well, and at the time, they might have also been like, who would ever need that much for a save game on PS2, right? They sold, I think they were 8 meg was the standard memory card. And then I think you could get a 16. And I think maybe eventually they released a 32, or was that like the next PlayStation? And
How hard is it, by the way, to go back and talk about megabytes? I want to say gigabyte in my head every time. I have to correct to say megabyte.
Every single time. Like, it's weird to even think about that having been like a measurement of like drive size.
And when was the last time you said kilobyte? Like,
and when you were like, oh my God, is that a 32 megabyte memory card? That's insane.
That's insane. That's a megabyte. But I just want to point out one thing about this really quickly. The Paramount decrees, which was the antitrust agreement, this is according to the Austin Chronicle article by Richard Whitaker. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm going to say his name as many times as I can here. It had blocked distributors and studios from owning their own theaters, but Sony and its Columbia Pictures subsidiary were not covered by the decree and had already dabbled with theatrical ownership in the past, such as the Lowe's theater chain, which it owned between 1988 and 2002.
Oh, interesting.
So Sony already owned theaters.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Like, I think they had one in San Francisco.
Let's fire back around and have you talk about E3 here, though.
All right, let's talk about E3. It's E3, everybody. Welcome to E3. They had the Summer Games Fest, which honestly, it was. Here's the trouble with Summer Games Fest is all of the big guys.
I want to apologize to Jeff Keighley personally for just calling it E3. We were just talking about getting away from it, and I just called it E3. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
So Summer Games Fest has gone. They've also had the PlayStation, I think their State of Play, and then Xbox just did their games showcase. So everyone's kind of doing their thing. I think Nintendo's still supposed to be doing something in June, but I don't know. I don't think we've got a date for that yet. Of the three, so far, I think Xbox has been the strongest. Summer Games Fest showed some interesting stuff. I think they announced Horizon Lego game.
Oh, that's cool.
It felt initially when I heard about it like kind of an odd fit because I always think of Lego as being primarily kid-friendly stuff like, cartoony Star Wars games and that kind of thing. But Lego has been doing a lot more adult-focused stuff, and they can sell you some very expensive Lego sets.
Yeah.
If you're a grown-up. So maybe this is them leaning a little bit more into that. And
there was a point in time in Lego's history where they were arguing internally about whether or not to do licensed sets, and apparently it was like down to the wire. Like I don't know if it was a vote or what, and they finally decided to do licensed sets, and it completely revitalized that company.
Yeah, I would say the whoever did the thumbs up for that is patting themselves on the back right now.
And while we're talking about video game stuff and stuff in the past and proprietary stuff,
yeah,
I read this article. Sega had, for their Dreamcast, a company that made some of their GPUs, and the company almost went bankrupt and had to be bailed out by Sega. And do you know what that company is today?
Who?
NVIDIA. Which is now racing towards a $4 trillion market cap against Apple and Microsoft. $4 trillion.
That is insane.
Do you know when they hit $1 trillion?
When?
I just read an article about this. May 2023. And they're already going towards $4 trillion.
So in the last year,
yeah, man,
NVIDIA tripled its market cap from $1 trillion, which is a hard number to say. It's like that's like the opposite of megabyte.
Yeah, right. We're going up now.
I'm like, is that the right letter to be putting at the beginning of this illion? Trillion. In the last year, they tripled that, and they're headed towards $4 trillion market cap. Look,
I've never written like a trillion, like a number. I've never written out a trillion. Have you?
I'm not even sure how many zeros that
You're
is.
right. I'm just sitting here thinking about it. Yeah, you just never done it before. And
You just start with the zeros and you stop eventually. But some
so the
other
first dude who hits $1 trillion net worth, we're gonna kill that guy, right? We're all just like, he just immediately we're gonna put a stop to this.
that guy's going to be on a rocket ship to
He should be.
to the new water they found on Mars.
Like money just flying off of him as he runs towards the ship.
He's just like throwing coins behind him as projectiles. But one of the other highlights I think you'll like, Bernie, out of Summer Games Fest is Civilization 7 got announced for 2025.
Really?
So next year there's a new Civ game coming
Sony
out.
didn't announce it. Who, Firaxis is doing that?
Yeah, that's for Axis. That was announced at Summer Games Fest. So I think that's a very exciting one for you in particular.
Civilization is one of those few franchises they got right the first time. All I want from Civilization is I just want the same game again. I don't care. Just make a new version of the same game and I'll be totally happy and I'll be happy to buy it.
You should go back and play the original Civilization and
Probably
see what you
should.
think about it. That'd be fun.
Yeah,
That'd be
probably
fun. But Xbox also had their games showcase, and there was some good stuff in that one. First of all, the biggest announcement, Bernie, I think, is that Fable is coming 2025.
Good for you. I'm happy for you. You love that franchise.
But they did some really great announcements. New Gears of War game, new Doom game. They showed off State of Decay 3, the new Indiana Jones game. They're rebooting Perfect Dark.
Really?
Yeah. They announced a new DLC for Starfield. Some really cool stuff there. They did some third-party stuff. Like they showed off a new Dragon Age game, which they've changed the name of, and everyone saw the trailer and was like, what the fuck is this? This looks completely ridiculous for a Dragon Age game. It's so cartoony. What are you doing? And then I think they released some gameplay like afterwards, and everyone said, this is nothing like the trailer. BioWare, this is very on brand, very confusing. What is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Yeah. But overall, the Xbox showcase was really great, I thought.
Okay, yeah, my go-to for video game news is a little crew out of Northern California I like to call Kinda Funny and Kinda Funny Games.
Oh, name drop.
And I was happy to see, I think because of Greg probably, I kind of think of them as being PlayStation-centric. And in their ratings, their whole crew, except for Blessing, gave the entire showcase, all of them gave it a 10 out of 10. And Blessing was a 9.5. Only, I believe his major detraction was that there wasn't enough release dates of when are these things coming? Because it all looks great, but when are we going to see these things?
Yeah, there were a lot of like
valid criticism.
Sort of like release windows or like here's an update and stuff. Some of the stuff that I'm looking forward to, Avowed, which is the new game from Obsidian. So that's exciting. But yeah, overall, really, really great. There's a bunch of like trailers floating around you should check out if you've got time between now and your next turbulence.
You know what I'm sitting here thinking about? I'm thinking about Horizon. I love the franchise. It is kind of dark for Lego because I think of Lego as being kid stuff because it's like, post-apocalyptic robots are hunting us, future. I don't want to spoil what the first game's about, but it's like distant future stuff. But the real thing that I'm taking away, what lends itself well to a Lego game is, I think, lots of characters. Like, that's the thing. And I don't think of Horizon as having a whole lot of characters.
No, I would agree with that. Like, we think of things like Star Wars or even something like Lord of the Rings. It's a pretty big cast, right?
The Marvel Universe, like the Lego Avengers game. Yeah.
Harry Potter.
Yeah.
But, they announced a new Harry Potter game as well. Interesting thing about the most recent Harry Potter game that came out, Hogwarts Legacy, was that there was an absence of Quidditch. And everyone said, it's because there's going to be another Quidditch game. And they showed off this Quidditch game. Dude, Quidditch is, hot take. Quidditch is stupid.
Quidditch, yeah, thank you. Okay, good. I agree with you. Quidditch is stupid.
It's like, I like a lot of the ideas. It's visually fun. But the existence of the snitch is the dumbest shit in the world.
I agree with this, that the snitch, when you capture it,
like,
independent of the rest of the game,
why even have
you can
any
win.
other players?
Right. Why not just have a snitch game?
Have two people try and catch a snitch and leave everyone else out of it. They're just sitting there getting like absolutely hammered by these murderous flying leather balls while some dude is trying to catch this little tiny gnat that's flying around.
It is weird. It is for a sport. It's weird. It's like it seems like a separate event, like in a Wizard Olympics. Like
Yeah,
there should be
let's
just
say
snitch
it's
catching.
wildly unbalanced.
It'd be like if you hear you broke the record in the javelin, and you say, yeah, but you lost because somebody caught a shot put or something like that. It's like I wasn't even in that event. I was doing my thing.
Yeah, it's just I was watching the trailer for this Quidditch game, going, so you just try and catch a snitch the whole time, right? Because there's no point playing any other role.
That is a good point. Like if it was in a video game, you would just do that all day, and it
Right.
wouldn't matter at all. It
Like
wouldn't
being
matter.
good at catching the snitch is what made Harry Potter such a special boy.
Yeah, but it does seem fun. It does seem like that somebody could make a Rocket League-esque style Quidditch game, but you would just have to leave out the snitch.
Right.
The snitch is like if Nintendo made every sports game. It's like who won the game? Well, this person won the game, but let's tell you who really won the
In
game.
Mario parties,
Yes.
the entire sport, yeah.
Yeah.
Where you're just like, you won, except this guy was out here in the parking lot, and guess what he found?
Right. I feel like the Mario Party, that bit at the end where they come and tell you what the different weights of the games were and who really won the game is like your parent showing up at the end and the big brother who just like crushed everybody the entire time. Then mom comes in and goes, oh, but Billy won, It's almost like Dumbledore, like points to Billy.
right at the end of term. Yeah, it is. It is just like that.
Perfect. So only Quidditch games should only exist on Nintendo. Well, how do you feel now about not being part of E3? Because lovely Ashley, who is sitting right across from me, you and Jeff Keighley were like partners in crime on the E3 showcase for YouTube. Like Jeff had the front end show, which was before the conference began, and then you took over after that for the 3 days of the conference.
Yeah, I mean, the balance was always really interesting with those. First of all, I cannot say enough good things about like Jeff Keighley. He's a fantastic producer. Dude knows how to get shit done. Do you know I've known him since 2004?
Is that right?
Yeah. He did a TV show for Spike TV called Gamehead.
Right.
And the very first episode of that show that he did for Spike TV, he had the Frag Dolls on.
Really?
Showing off Ubisoft's upcoming King Kong game. And so that's when I met Jeff Keighley. So I've known him a very, very long time. But he is a fantastic producer. He loves games so much. And it was always really interesting seeing, the writing on the wall for E3 as these press conferences became more and more important, more so even than the live demos of the game that took place over the 3 days of the show itself. There was so much focus on those press conferences, and that's what people would really tune in for. By the time the show started, it was over.
Yeah. By the time we got to the actual conference, the show had already been completed for most people.
Yeah, and it doesn't help too that with the press conferences, E3 went from being a 3-day show to then there's like a 4-day show. They do some press conferences the day before, and then here you get to play the games, to a 5-day show where it's 2 days of press conferences and then 3 days of demos, to a 6-day show. And, you just see everyone moving forward. And by the time you get to the end of 6 days, everyone's exhausted.
Yeah.
It's just, Bernie, it's just too much.
Yeah, we were as well. That was wild.
It was it was easily the most stressful time of year for me, getting all that stuff organized, working with all the publishers to program the demos and schedules and get everything going. Obviously, did not do it all myself. Had so much help from so many people at Rooster Teeth. But it was a great time.
Arguably some of the hardest times we had, but when I see people like from that era, when they post about their favorite memories of that time, it's almost always that E3 showcase they talk about. Even people who had a really tough time at Rooster Teeth.
It was a fun time, especially afterwards, after it was over, when we got some sleep and could go, yeah, that was cool.
Glad it's over, but it was really cool. All right, anyone we should thank for today's show? And we're going to probably be doing 3 names because I was derelict in my duty of thanking people from the Patreon. So we might do 3 names for a couple of weeks.
We'll do a couple makeups. Yes, I would like to thank Robin Coopers, Natalia Kononenko, and Hyper Lethal Hunk for sponsoring this episode of Morning Somewhere.
One of those kids is doing their own thing.
Thank you all for being sponsors of our Patreon at patreon.com/morningsomewhere.
All right, Ashley, it has been wonderful to brave the horrors of flight in order to come back and see you. I'm so glad to be sitting back across from you. Thank you to all of our guests from the past week when we were Ashley-less. But it's good to be back home and good to be across from you again. All right, well, that does it for us today, June 13th, 2024. We will be back to talk to you tomorrow. I hope you'll be here as well.
Bye, everybody.